Hello.
Hi, Andre.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, Andre. How you doing?
Yeah, fantastic.
Good.
Sorry about the slight delay.
Just for the audience, Andre Walker, tell us a little bit about, I know, in fact, you are a real journalist and you cover real news and you live in London. So that's one great reason we're talking to you now about this horrific terror attack today. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, in fact, you're not quite right. I'm based in London. I'm what's called a lobby correspondent for what we call the New York Observer, what you call the Observer. And so I'm based in Downing Street and the British Parliament. And essentially, a lobby correspondent is kind of like the White House press corps. So that's what I do. But in fact, I live in the lovely town of Windsor, which is the Queen's hometown, about 40 minutes outside London. But nonetheless, I live by American standards, Windsor is virtually London. But obviously, it's been an extremely stressful and difficult day today. Just to remind your listeners, just in case they've missed it, essentially, somebody, officially we don't know who, but of course we know that the British and European police never admit when jihadi terrorists are responsible for something. But nonetheless, we believe a jihadi terrorist took a 4x4 and mounted the curb on Westminster Bridge, taking out a huge number of people. In fact, we're told now as many as 40 people have been hospitalised from that attack. And then he crashed into the fences around the Palace of Westminster. And I have to say, virtually no damage done to the fences. So in fact, the fact that the building is supposed to be very well protected appeared initially to work. But then he gets out with his knife and gets to what's called Carriage Gate. Now, for those of you that have been to London, many of your listeners will have, this is the big gate near Big Ben. And so many people who've been to London will have got a photo of this gate. Now, if you recall, if you've been there are only 2 police officers there, and critically, they're unarmed. What they will have is just a standard sort of truncheon nightstick type thing. No taser, no gun. And this guy was able to run in and stab PC Keith Palmer, a 48-year-old, and get this, a 48-year-old former Royal Artillery soldier who is also was a serving Metropolitan Police officer. Now, the point I've made in my article in The Observer today is this: how on earth can you have a facility that's supposed to be this secure and then have unarmed guards on the door? I mean, also, if you think, now, I agree with the British opposition, which is that we have as few police armed as possible. And obviously, because it's not a gun-owning society, there is not a need for every single police officer to have a gun. But what a ridiculous situation to have a former professional soldier and police officers standing at the gate of a very, very significant a terrorist target being completely unarmed. And of course, what then happens is, because Keith Palmer is then stabbed, the terrorist himself is shot in New Palace Yard, which I reckon that he probably made it from the gate about half of the distance required to get to the Prime Minister's office in Parliament. And the Prime Minister, funnily enough, was in there. And I should just explain that every Wednesday, the Prime Minister comes to Parliament to have really abuse thrown at her in what's called Prime Minister's Question Time, which you can get on YouTube. It's fascinating to watch, it has to be said. So every Wednesday, she moves from Downing Street into her office in the House of Commons, which is where she was. Now, obviously, she was evacuated. Now, obviously, the other thing, it's important to note that there were firearms officers in backup, and within a couple of minutes, they were on the scene, and they were the people that shot the terrorists. But, I can only reiterate again that the idea that with a knife you could get into this facility is to me, absolutely extraordinary. And I think that we've lost the life of a great patriotic former soldier and police officer because he didn't have a gun today. I think that is shameful.
Right. A 48-year-old husband and father, Keith Palmer.
That's right. Former Royal Artillery soldier.
So,
which, incidentally, I should say, it's not too unusual. Obviously, most police officers, enter as comparatively young people. But the sort of P Division Palace Guard, very often they are retired soldiers. So I wouldn't say they're old, but, they're not young lads either. Sort of, 40s would be a kind of fairly typical age. And Keith Palmer's background appears to be fairly standard for the Metropolitan P Division.
Right. So what happened then is the terrorists drove that vehicle and knocked over upwards of 40 people, killing 4 or 5 people, severely injuring a number more. And then he jumps out of the car.
Well, I thought what was quite shocking about this is that the doctors at St. Thomas's Hospital, which incidentally is at the other end of Westminster Bridge, so really not very far away at all,
right.
They described the injuries as they described some people as having catastrophic injuries. Now,
right.
We see the news all the time. I think for a medic to describe something as catastrophic injury really has to be quite shocking in their nature. And unbelievably, two of these people who are fighting for their lives in hospital were police officers who actually had been to something, I don't know what it was, on the other side of Westminster Bridge and were making their way back to Parliament. And so they were literally just run down as they walked across the bridge. So it's a pretty shocking thing. One thing I will say, though, to be fair, this guy appears to be a lone wolf. It's a pretty low-tech attack. Ultimately, Keith Palmer was killed, but this was the first line of defence at the Palace of Westminster. And so far, forget the number 5. When people say 5 people have died, they're including him, right? As far as I'm concerned, he can take a hike. I'm calling him 4, right? Because 4 ordinary, decent people died, one jihadi scumbag. But compared to certainly some of the attacks that we've seen in continental Europe, this appears to be the death toll appears to be a lot less, which I think is merciful. I don't want to belittle the fact that 4 people died, but on the other hand, in some of the tragedies, there's been dozens. Right,
exactly. Well, then Andre, so after he jumped out of the car wielding that knife and approached the 2 guards, you said, both of which were unarmed other than a stick. And that's one of the guards then was Keith Palmer, who he stabbed multiple times and ultimately died. But it was other police units that were further back that were armed that were able to shoot the terrorists. Is that correct?
Yes. So there is an arrangement which obviously the public are not privy to, where police officers, I think, can press some sort of a panic button in Parliament, and that will deploy an armed response team. I don't want to belittle the efforts of Police Constable Keith Palmer, but it's very clear that all he did was acted as a pincushion for the stabbing, and then other officers came in and shot him. It does appear that really he had no chance against this guy whatsoever, and so his best efforts really didn't amount to very much. And it seems to me that is related to the fact he's unarmed. Now, I said in my article that the Palace of Westminster, in fact, is the main building that you're all aware with Big Ben or whatever. But actually, there's a large number of other buildings, and I will tell you that I wrote about, although I didn't list the exact location, of an entrance where regularly there is one unarmed guy guarding an entrance to the Palace of Westminster, which you can get. If you got past him, you would have access to hundreds of MPs' offices. Now, the reason why that wasn't attacked today is because most people are not familiar with the sheer number of buildings that are interconnected in Parliament.
I know you make a great point in your article that a lot of those entrances are unknown even to native folk. You just don't know where they are. So thank God he didn't go there.
Yes. Well, but of course they're not exactly. Whilst they're not publicly advertised, they're not unknown either. I mean, there's probably 10,000 people who have passes for the Palace of Westminster. Any cleaner who gets dropped off in the morning might know this. Anyone who drops them off. So it's not completely unknown. And it does strike me that you do the same thing to one of these back entrances. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge to know where they are. You go to one of those back entrances, and you could be in some of the office complexes, and I don't know how long it would take before the armed police would turn up. I mean, by the way, what I'm trying to do is slightly anonymise the way I explain this to you, simply because, unfortunately, the sad thing is, if you and I discuss things openly, then you never know who's going to listen and take notes. So, but I can assure you that there are office blocks that would really be very easy to get into. And I would also make the point, if you were to if you could go to the US Capitol and suggest that you surround the gates to the building or the entrances to the building with guys with sticks, you would be laughed at, and rightly so.
Yes.
And I do think that the colleagues of Metropolitan Police P Division in the capital would have, I think, probably not sustained this fatality today, because they would have had the guns. And frankly, as they always say, you take a gun to a knife fight, you're going to win, right? It's pretty obvious.
Right. Well, Andre, do you feel like things are going to change now, perhaps, with what's happened today?
I would certainly hope so. I mean, there is a bit of a difficulty, which is that British police are generally unarmed. But I think more importantly, British police generally don't have a need to be armed. So there is always the conversation about what is the bare minimum number of firearms officers we can have. Because you've got to bear in mind, what the British will do is they will look to America and go, we fully understand why your police have guns, because obviously so does the population, and it would be ludicrous for them not to. But there is a cost associated with that, because every single additional firearm in a police officer's hand, mistakes will happen, become more likely as a result. And obviously there have been some distressing situations in America, but that is an inevitability. So we're trying to keep it to a bare minimum. But I would argue that the people who are guarding the entrances to the Palace of Westminster, to Downing Street, are qualify for that bare minimum. And also, I keep labelling this point, but this guy is a former professional soldier, presumably with advanced weapons training. I mean, the Royal Artillery. Like, I've never been a member of the Royal Artillery, but I imagine this guy is somebody who can handle some serious military hardware. And the idea that a small handgun was beyond his capability, I think, is really laughable. I just feel as if today, look, you are never going to be able to stop somebody taking a 4x4 and mounting the curb. Right? It's just never going to. It's one of those things. Unfortunately, it's low tech. They know, the terrorists know that the British, Americans, Australians, whatever, have infiltrated their communications network to such an extent that, if they whistle on Kilimanjaro, they're going to get heard in Langley. So they're going for low tech things. So I don't think we're ever going to be able to stop the mounting the curbs lunatics. But I do think that the fatality of PC Keith Palmer was preventable today. I think that the strategy that we've adopted in terms of securing the building is what is responsible for his death. And that's not, I'm not attempting to dish out any blame here. Ultimately, he'd still be alive if terrorists hadn't attacked the building. But nonetheless, lessons do need to be learned, and I think they will be. We've also got, I think we've also got the SAS ready in case of emergency, which was not needed today. Okay, this guy did pretty well. He got halfway over New Palace Yard, but I mean, he didn't get the whole way, I suppose, is he?
Yeah, and the Prime Minister was there today as well.
Well, he was halfway towards the Prime Minister's office, because that overlooks New Palace Yard. Some of the best offices are there. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a significant problem. And so, if he'd gone a little bit further, he would have been getting quite close to the Prime Minister's official vehicles. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because that then starts blocking escape routes for the Prime Minister. But this is not the first time there's been problems with Carriage Gate and New Palace Yard. The Palace of Westminster, I should explain, is a big Victorian fake. It's supposed to look 500 years old, but it's only like 150, 160 years old. And so, there are things in there that you might not expect. As an example, under New Palace Yard, there's a 6-story underground car park. In 1979, Irish Republican terrorists brought a bomb in there and blew up Harry Neve, who was Margaret Thatcher's Northern Ireland spokesman, who at 79 was the election. A month later, he would have become the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Now, ultimately, somebody's managed to plant a bomb in the building is a pretty significant fail, and then somebody's able to knife their way into halfway to the Prime Minister's office, I think is another pretty significant fail. And this 4x4 crashes into the fence, and the fence is undamaged. There's no point in having a building that is that robust, that has that level of security. If you're going to leave the entrances, the place unguarded. It's a complete waste of time. You might as well pull the fences down, have everyone wandering in as they want.
Right. Well, listen, Andre, we really appreciate you sharing more detail, and what great detail it was. Only somebody who has that knowledge you do could share it. And for the listeners, Andre had mentioned his article today in The Observer. Check that out. It's off the charts, and he just filled us in with more info. So, Andre, thank you so much. We're going to have to let you go.
No problem.
And we'll talk again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We will. See you later.